Hello and welcome to Shade. I'm your host, Lou Mensah. It's so good to have you join me. Today's episode is particularly special for me in many ways. Back in 2016, I sat down with Tim Shaw and Neve White just as they were launching hospital rooms. At that time, it was a bold idea, bringing world-class contemporary art into NHS mental health care units. And I remember the mixture of excitement and trepidation that they were experiencing as they described the scale of their vision. And that conversation resonated because I have my own connection to these spaces. In the 1980s, my dad worked as a porter at Leavesden Hospital, a mental health care unit in Hertfordshire. And I vividly remember visiting their summer fete as a 15-year-old back in 1987. And what struck me most was the contrast within the space. There were the very human connections between the staff and the service users. But this was set against the stark institutional kind of bleakness of the buildings themselves. And maybe some of you listening have had similar experiences of those spaces. It was a very different time in these units back in the 80s, but maybe you've had experiences more recently, whether through visiting family or friends or through your work or your own journey as a service user. You'll know that the staff are working in challenging environments and the users are living in spaces that are not always conducive to healing. So now, 8 years after that first interview with Tim and Neve, it's extraordinary to come full circle and see how their seedling of an idea has grown into something truly transformative. But there have, of course, been challenges along the way. What began as a single project has expanded into a charity that has revolutionised mental health care spaces across the UK, radically transforming the experiences of service users through extraordinary art and workshops. But the journey hasn't been straightforward. They've had to navigate bureaucratic hurdles, challenge ingrained institutional thinking about what mental health care spaces should look like, and carefully balance artistic vision with very real clinical requirements. Today, we're focusing on their most ambitious project at Helston Hospital, which is part of the Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. This project embodies both the successes and challenges of their work, from the triumph of commissioning 15 incredible artists to create site specific works, to the complex realities of working within a trust that has faced its own struggles in recent years. Joining me are three remarkable individuals who have been integral to this transformation. Ken Nwadiogbu, a multidisciplinary artist from Lagos, whose journey from civil engineering to fine art has led him to this transformative project, alongside the artist Sarah Dwyer, whose practice centres on drawing while incorporating painting, printmaking, and sculpture. And Dr. Sophie Bagg, the lived experience lead at the Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust, who brings invaluable perspective as someone with personal and professional insights. Throughout this episode, you'll hear a composition by Mark Jennings titled Wards Extended 2025, created from recordings made in two psychiatric facilities, one abandoned and awaiting demolition, and the other newly built and preparing to open. These documented sounds are of spaces in transition and are interwoven with reactions from service users and the artists and those with lived experience, the users, the service users, telling the story of two buildings in flux and culminating in a composition written for a forgotten piano found in the old hospital. Okay, let's go to the conversation with Ken, Sophie, and Sarah. Ken, I think your background is fascinating, especially in relation to art and where you are now. But like, you started in civil engineering, and from there you went into working in hyperrealism and now to more conceptual work. I'm wondering how your technical background influenced your approach to this project.
You're very right. My technical background in civil engineering really have influenced my work. I used to see people make buildings, and I used to wonder why they are so dull and without design, without beauty, without colors. And so one of the goal I had as a civil engineer was to bring color in buildings and in structures. But I deviated from civil engineering into art, which was a blessing to me. But I've always wanted to do mural. I've always been really interested in making sure that I was able to change spaces and structures. So when I was called to paint the Helsden Hospital, I was kind of excited about it because this is my first public mural project. To me, it was a start to a dream that I once had. And, to do that in a mental institution, to do that in Helsden Hospital was just perfect. And to do that with, collaborating with hospital rooms as well, which is an incredible, incredible organization, was really, really strong. So civil engineering has always made me so keen on meticulousness and patience and just making sure that the image looks so good. That's why I started to gravitate towards hyperrealism, because hyperrealism made you be meticulous, be focused, and be patient in creating what you were creating. So my love for art came from engineering.
Did anything surprise you that came up from that collaborative process with the service users, Ken?
Yes, I realized that not everything you put on canvas should be put on the wall. That was my first discovery. Now, thinking back to my history, my dad was a medical doctor, so I spent most of my life in the hospital, and I hated the hospital because it was dull, it was scary, it didn't make me feel at home. Then my brother became a medical doctor, and I hated to go see my brother at work as well. But working on this project gave me a different appreciation for these spaces. I realized that it wasn't the space that was the problem, it was the way it was represented that's the problem. So it was my goal to try and make sure that what I put on the wall is what I would love to see. If my father was working there and I wanted to come visit, that is something I would love to see. I would love to, I'd feel at home, I'd feel comfortable in that space. So I was just looking for something that gave comfort, that gave hope, that gave people a sense of belonging, and that calmed you down. So I started playing with the colors, the oranges and the yellows and the blues, just to find that perfect blend between having something incredible and having something that could be lived with.
I'd like to Sophie to bring you in here as the lived experience lead for inpatient services within the Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. You've been instrumental in shaping this project. Can you share a little bit about what your role entails and why it's so crucial to like informing projects of this kind?
Many people have been instrumental in this project, and it has been such a meaningful, collaborative, and truly special experience for many, and is something that I certainly won't forget. So, my role within the organisation is to support all people with lived experience of mental ill health and their carers, families, and supporters who have experienced mental health, learning disability, and/or autism in patient care to be involved in our organisation, so that in all we do, we have multiple perspectives to ensure that we design and deliver safe and high quality mental health care and treatment. And we can only do that effectively with equal and meaningful lived and learned experiences together. In terms of the hospital rooms project, I think by having a person employed by the organisation as a lived experience lead, which means that I've got my own experience of mental health care and inpatient mental health care, I think in a way, it may have supported all people to come together as their authentic selves and supports the erosion of any us and them cultures that can sometimes occur from both perspectives within mental health care. And I hope for our artists, like Sarah and Ken, who I had the absolute pleasure of working alongside at different times, But prior to people coming, I hope I was able to allay any concerns or answer any questions they may have had coming to be alongside our staff, patients, and communities within the workshops. And also, I really hope to further support them to understand the gift they've given us through their involvement and their artwork. They have given that to our organisation, but most importantly, in giving people experiencing mental ill health, their families and carers and staff, an environment that inspires conversation and creativity, and in environments that are reflective of recovery and hope. That for me is the real heart of what everyone has come together to do.
And I'm wondering about that kind of integration and the connection and the communication between the service users and the planners and artists, and how that kind of like information flow happened. I know there was workshops that were involved. I just wondered what some of the kind of key insights were.
So I think we've come a long way in mental health care, haven't we? And the environments certainly have changed, but I think a lot are still quite stark clinical environments. And when you're trying to recover, especially when you're really, really poorly and needing inpatient mental health care, actually that's not always helpful. But from a personal example, the outside is hugely important to me personally. And I think for every person, freedom and future is of fundamental importance. However, sometimes when people are really poorly, people have to come into hospital. And certainly, sometimes, and it certainly has been the case for me, for periods of time, it may not be considered safe for a person to leave the ward. And so you are limited on your access to the outside. And the gardens in the New River Centres are phenomenal, but this importance of connections with the outside and nature really came through in the project. And this is reflected in lots of the art installations. For example, Holly Sanderford's work in the retreat rooms brings the wider Helsden site into the ward. And the installations from Dolly, Mark, and others that are in the grounds supporting people to explore their surroundings when they can.
I think it's fitting to bring Sarah in here. So your work blends figurative and abstract elements, like with a vibrancy and there's color and I just wondered how your work and the way in which you work influenced your approach to creating the work specifically for this setting.
I made my piece particularly in response to the three different workshops. So one workshop was in a mother and baby unit, and I was absolutely thrilled. And I spoke to one of the curators, Sapiwa, could I do the mother and baby unit? I really wanted to be able to do that because I went through a long journey to have a child, over 10 years. And at times I could have done with mental health support during that journey. So it was very, very important for me to get access to develop workshops for this unit because I knew that I would be able to immediately respond to these women. I knew I would get a bit of magic, and I did. And that helped me kind of create my mural. It really fed into what I was going to do. And there was a particular moment in, I think there were 8 service users in the ward that hadn't really had much exposure to anybody outside the ward apart from their clinicians the day I was there, and they had very young babies. There was one particular African lady who didn't speak English, but I didn't know she didn't speak. I didn't know that French was her only language that she could speak with regards to the staff in the ward. I must have been there an hour or two providing the workshop. And then I just spoke to her in French. Something told me she spoke French. And she responded and started telling me how she'd been to art school and how she had had this whole other life 25 years ago and everything. I was like, oh, okay. And then suddenly I saw the power in what we'd just done for an hour. The other thing was I went into another workshop, which was service users who were long-term service users, but it was on one of the wards in Helsden. And there were a whole other group of service users who were in residence in the hospital, and there were quite a few individuals who were coming in and out of the ward of the workshop. I found it quite challenging to figure out what I was going to do with these people. And as I was doing the workshop, I realized, okay, I'm going to have to move my body here. I'm going to have to physically move around the room. And we had to physically move around the room to engage with them. And I really enjoyed that. And when I was making the work, I realized I'd have to change the work because the patients were not chasing me, but they wanted to interact with me when I was installing the mural. And Sapiwe, the curator, said that was the first time that the patients had actually wanted to help an artist. And then another thing in developing the mural for me, no matter how many ideas I had before I went in there, it changed on the wards because I went in one day and I asked the other team members who were helping me, the technicians, let's lie down. I want the service users to feel safe, to lie on the floor or lie on the sofa or lie outside on the ground, and they don't have to sit. So I said to everybody, imagine you're really having a bad day. Lie down and look up. Do we need to make it punchier and more celestial or not?
And I'm just thinking about that feeling of expansiveness that we can get just from a change of perspective.
And moving through a space.
Moving. Yeah.
So it was a kind of freewheeling conversation I was having with myself and with the people I was experiencing in there.
My process and experience making the mural was different from Sarah's. Sarah was in the space where these service users were active. I was in the construction site. So, so the best I could get was the people who were working there going, whoa, this will be so cool, you know? Yeah, so that was my feedback. But all I could think of was when people who inhabit these spaces come, how do they feel? How is the experience like? And that's what I kind of put into the work.
Sophie, back to you. I'm thinking about your role again. I've been looking into the history of the trust and what's been happening before this project. And I was aware that the trust has faced its own challenges in recent years. And I was wondering how this context has perhaps influenced the way that the Hospital Rooms project was received by staff and users.
In terms of those challenges within the clinical setting that we experienced in this project, I think for me it was mostly about understanding and somehow bringing together a clinical service and creativity is not something that historically would have even been considered as important. But the culture of healthcare, especially mental health care, is changing. And we can see that tangibly in our workforce. For example, Debs and Charles at Helston, our incredible lead occupational therapist and art psychotherapist, and their wider teams alongside our workforce were integral to this project. However, with all change and challenge, to move forwards, we often need to experience discomfort, and with discomfort, resistance can occur. I believe genuinely, overall, everyone involved in this project wanted and wants the same thing, which is the best possible inpatient care for people with mental ill health and their carers. I think the challenges we faced were about the perceived appropriateness of some of the artwork for the settings they were to be installed in. So it wasn't about the art as such, it was about the art in this particular space. And mental health wards and environments are quite unique places. Safety and care must be the priority. And say, for example, soft furnishings like rugs or soft cushions or many materials can't be put into the wards, mainly due to it being a hospital and the need to keep people safe from infection, and therefore fabrics need to be cleaned on a specific basis to stop that potential infection. And this is why, when we were deciding on the installations, we had such a range of expertise. So not only hospital rooms and the creative expertise, but also infection prevention control, fire officers, all sorts of people, to make sure that when we put the artwork in, when it was installed, that it was safe for everybody.
Well, finally, this is a question for all of you. If there are any other NHS trusts here who are thinking of doing similar work, who might be hesitant about introducing contemporary art into their spaces, maybe we can hear about what the impact is and what the impact could be if further trusts would be open to introducing art into their spaces.
So for me, this whole project, and I hate kind of reducing it down to the word project, has been a real journey. And the workshops for me, they were just truly powerful spaces. And I would say to other organisations, think about the journey. And I was blown away by the ability of hospital rooms and our artists to create spaces that people felt equal in, they felt heard, and they could settle into and engage creatively. And even though some freely shared that they had not done anything artistic since school, for me, a lot of the changes in the artworks with the artist, from my understanding, came from the reflections people with lived experience shared during or after the workshops. And for one woman, she said that it was the first time in months she had experienced a quiet mind. And I don't think anyone who hasn't experienced voices or intrusive rapid thoughts can truly understand what it is like when, even for a short period, you experience some rest from that. And in tangible examples, there was one man who was part of the workshop and drew a hot air balloon. And I won't try and replicate his reflection on why he chose to draw that hot air balloon, but of importance to him was making a mark. And for him, he hoped that his thoughts and art would make it to the final piece, as he described it, as marking his time in hospital, the end of that period and the start of a new one. And if you come to our gym, which anyone's welcome to come and have a look at, you will find many hot air balloons. They truly are beautiful, and everyone will interact with that artwork differently. But for me, I will always remember that person and their reflections. And I look at all hot air balloons very differently now. And for me, it's about the possibility of leaving behind and starting anew. And so I would encourage any NHS organisation to be brave and bold, to think differently, to think innovatively, and to value creativity. I have truly seen the impact of this work right from the beginning through those many, many, many workshops, which were all unique and wonderful, to those conversations, those challenging conversations actually between the organisation, clinicians, senior leaders, artists, hospital rooms, infection prevention, fire, all these people coming together, patients, carers, communities. And even though sometimes those conversations may not have gone the way that each individual wanted them to, they started that conversation, and forwards movement always comes from that.
That's hard to follow. Go on, Ken. Go for it, Ken.
Okay. Um, this has been so impactful to me, as well as to everyone I've come in contact with during this project. You know, there is this thing you're being taught as an artist. Don't care about the public, just do what you want. But this project made me really care. It made me take myself out of the work and actually put other people in. And it was a different experience. It was a very liberating experience. The workshop to start with was incredible. Before we started the workshop, I'll tell everyone to stand up and actually dance, and we would dance around. It was kind of one of the most interesting part of teaching anyone how to paint. And we danced around. And I remember someone saying, if I did that randomly, it would be a problem. But because it was a workshop, because it was a space for art, he could enjoy it because it was art. And I think that's what art does, doesn't it? It gives you that space to be who you are, and to be yourself, to not have people judge you or look at you a certain way. And the workshop, just having people paint, and while painting, talk about their lives, talk about, the fact that they used to be a painter in those days and they kind of stopped. Um, and just to use that mindset into the mural, painting the work, having to go back, to finish up the painting, to have people come in to see the work. I think the whole experience was just incredible. Um, I really pray and hope that it brings so much joy and love to people. I know it's going to, because even just having an artwork in your space does a lot. You can imagine having artworks by incredible artists like Sarah Dwyer. Come on, you have to feel something. You have to feel something, and that's I think one of the most impactful part of this project was for me. It gave me this sense of, it made me feel something. It took me out of my work and made me bring other people into the work. And to others, I feel art has always has a purpose, and the purpose is to uplift and to give people hope and love. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I became an artist, because what I did gave people could relate to it and feel it. And when people feel what you've done, I think that's such a powerful thing.
I was quite overwhelmed. Like, I'm not somebody who's in my studio on my own all day just making paintings. I have a whole group of young people around me who I'm kind of teaching or mentoring. And I was quite taken aback by the feedback, the very strength of feedback I was being given in a hospital scenario in terms of the workshop. I didn't realize how intense it was going to be to get this strong kind of wave of love back to me. So strong with people I'd never met before. And whether that was the staff, the NHS staff like Sophie, or the lived experience staff, other lived experience staff, or the art therapist, or whoever I interacted with, or the curators when I first did the workshops, I was like, wow, this is powerful. And then I felt it from the patients themselves when I had to run after them in the workshops, and they were having a good time, but they were physically moving around the space. So I didn't encourage dancing, but I ended up dancing without requesting it. And it was quite, and then of course, when I went into the mother and baby unit, and when you see individuals who are the most vulnerable in society because they're there with small, very newborn babies, and you really feel the power of vulnerability of these individuals and their babies. And you see the joy, this moment of joy they're getting. It's very momentary because they have to mind a little baby while they do it. So there is kind of quite time parameters around these women in terms of what they can get out of it. But when you see the switch go off and the joy in their faces start to light up, you're like, and it's not a baby lighting up their face, it's something else. You think, okay, this is good stuff. This is a bit of magic. You can't make this up. This is hot. You cannot make it. You just have to be in the moment. And then something happens and they want to come over and give you a hug, but they can't give you a hug, but you want to give them a hug. You want to chat, but you can't, and then you just think, oh, okay, it's a bit of magic happened there. And then you walk out and you get very emotional yourself. So yourself as an individual has been completely overwhelmed by the situation. That changes you and you can't go back. Because then you realize I make these kind of bits of drawing or painting or whatever it is you do every day in the studio. And of course, Ken and myself like what we do, and it gives us joy. But when you see it moving somebody else, properly moving them, you're like, okay. Medicine can't do that somehow. A tablet doesn't do that. And that was the best thing for me. Okay, it was wonderful to be able to do a mural. It was wonderful to be able to challenge myself technically, to be able to make these 3 rooms and make my paintings in a large scale. That was a technical challenge. That's fine. But to make somebody move them, that's a hard thing to do. And hospital rooms does that.
Hey, it's Lou, and I'm just popping back to say thank you for listening to this conversation. The Hospital Rooms initiative at Helston Hospital clearly demonstrates the powerful intersection of art, lived experience, and mental health care. Shape Shift, an exhibition of artworks from the Hospital Rooms Helston project, curated in collaboration with the Lived Experience team, opens at the Fitzrovia Chapel in London from March the 13th until the 25th, 2025. This powerful exhibition showcases how Hospital Rooms and its partners are transforming mental health spaces through extraordinary art. I'm Lou Mensah, and this has been Shade. Thanks for listening.